Thomas here with Much Props, gonna give you another how-to video. It is Friday, and of course it's a build day. I've been working on some stuff all week long, and hopefully it is gonna turn out epic for us today. I love Skyrim. If you can't tell by a lot of the things that I build on the channel, it's definitely something that I'm strongly influenced by, and I was trying to think of something that was relatively simple. Like, all you would need is like maybe a picture reference and a couple of measurements of how big things are, and you could do this yourself and also serve some type of function, maybe. And the treasure chest, the storage containers kind of came to mind within the game because there's a lot of different ones. And the one that really popped into my mind the most was the dungeon chest, which is at the end of dungeons. Usually after you fight a boss or something, it's what's laying there with all the super awesome materials and equipment that you can get. I went in game and I found a couple of them. And I mean, I played Skyrim dozens of times all the way through. And I just picked one random spot, went to it, kind of got some images as a reference, and then moved on to it. I'm going to use my Cos-Tools that I got a while back from Logan Tools, kind of run them through the rigor and see how accurate I can cut stuff and make it nice and easy on myself. So today we are building a dungeon chest from Skyrim using Cos-Tools. Let's get to building. Logan Graphics Tools is the sponsor of this video. Yes, you heard me right. I got a sponsor for this one. They were nice enough to send me some tools to try out a while back, and I'm pretty picky about what I promote on the channel because I want to use something that actually works and is good for you as a community. These tools are awesome. I see myself using them quite a bit. I started by looking in Sketchfab for a 3D model and found one relatively accurate. I start cutting the basic shape of the box, just kind of guessing as I go. I'll give you the measurements here in a minute. I put 2 marks measuring from the same side, line up the channel rail, then insert the straight cutter to just pull it through. Notice I'm not cutting on my typical glass top. Cos-Tools recommended that I have a sacrificial piece of foam board underneath to prevent the blade from dulling. I did find that it worked a lot better that way. This is 6mm What the Foam I am using from Cosplay Apprentice. I'll talk more about why I chose the particular foams for this. Once I get the long side pieces, I can figure out the short ends. They will be the same height as the long ones and will be the length of the bottom short side minus the width of 2 sheets of EVA. I know that sounds ridiculous. I'll give you the measurements here in a second so you can see how that compares. 2 thicknesses of 6mm is about ½ an inch. I'll use the circle cutter from Cos-Tools properly here in a second, but it just so happened that the outside of the circle cutter was close to the size of the dome on the top of my chest relative to the ratio I built it. So I traced it, used the bracing pegs as a guide for my middle line, and cut it out. The dimensions of my base box were pretty simple to come up with, about the size of a piece of What the Foam. The bottom was 17.5 inches by 9 inches. The short sides are 8.5 inches wide by 8 inches tall, and the long side is 17.5 inches by 8 inches tall. So you see that ½ inch that you see on the sides is the difference of the 2 thicknesses on the long piece. I chose to use 6mm What the Foam for the build because it's extremely rigid foam, which means I can get away with using a thinner foam that'll still hold its structure well without a bunch of support. This 6mm holds better than a lot of 10mm. Contact cement the edges and just stick them together.
I trimmed off about 1 inch on the bottom of the circle and the width of the thickness of a chisel tipped Sharpie on the round edge to allow me to use a full sheet of what the foam for the curved top. I didn't have a big roll of it that I could use. I heat bent the top portion so that it had a little bit of a curve. Glue the inside of my little half circles into it. All my edges will be reinforced with another layer on top of them to add recesses and trim work and stuff around the chest, so it's gonna be sturdy. These pieces will be glued to the inside of my top piece to add that recess in the middle of the chest. I am making a line to put glue on and help me evenly line it up on my top. I did use just a little 1/2 inch strip around the top of this 10mm foam for the recess strips to kind of match the in-game model. A lot of this build is just cutting strips of random sizes of foam to add details. Treasure chests are a great first build for beginners because it's a basic shape with simple details that work for most of the parts. From what I can tell from the chest in the game, it's a wooden chest with like intricate recess panels that seem to be made of like metal, so I figured it would be easier to make my base rectangle as the recess and then lay strips of foam over the top of it as the wood trim. These are just strips of 2-inch wide EVA strips. Another benefit of doing it this way, all of my corners will get reinforced with the overlap of the strips, which will make it even more sturdier. Spacing all of this as evenly as I possibly can as I work my way around the base and the top. The front of the chest has this big like medallion decorative looking thing on the front. I don't know if it's supposed to be part of the lock or not, but the actual lock sits on the lid piece. I am going to use the circle cutter to cut a perfect circle. I measure my gap, adjust the circle cutter's tool slider on the inside to that measurement, and then simply crank the blade down onto the foam. I think I'll need maybe 3 total to make it stand out far enough from the rest of the box. Now I need to cut out a center in 2 of these circles that I just cut to make kind of the heavy beveled edge. I pop them back into the hole I cut them out of. I forgot to mark the center, of course, before I cut the circles, so instead of trying to use some fancy ruler tricks where you measure from the edges to get the center mark, I just traced it on a piece of paper, cut it out, folded the paper in half twice, and then cut the middle. That gives me a perfect center line that I can then trace onto my circles. I line the prong up with the circle cutter tool and cut out the inside circle. For the beveled edge, I use that same circle I traced onto the paper earlier. Mark around 1/2 inch thickness and then cut out that perimeter to then trace onto my foam. I then trace a reference line on the side about halfway down, and using the retractable blade between those two lines as even as I possibly can, I pull through. Make sure to have your blade sharpened. Mine wasn't, of course, as I went to pull through, so I had to stop and sharpen it and then pull again. The more even the pull through, the less sanding you'll have to do later. I position the medallion and need to cut out a little part of the top of the box so that it rests on it. Above the medallion will be the lock mechanism. To figure out small pieces that need to fit in, I eyeball them and use just a piece of paper. If it's too small, I can just cut it again. Once it's shaped right, trace that piece of paper onto your foam and cut it out. I need 2 layers of foam, that 10mm foam I used earlier and the 6mm on top of that to make it flush with that ridge I have. Then the lock face is done the exact same way. Using a piece of paper, I figure out the shape I want, cut it all to pieces to where I get it, where I need it, and then just cut it onto my foam. For my recessed panels, I decided to go with some 3mm EVA that I got at the hobby store. It's a lower density, lower quality foam, which is easier to burn in my details with a wood burner. I used 3 different foams for specific reasons. What the foam for its rigidity, SKS because I had it in 10mm thickness and I needed that extra thickness, and then the cheap stuff because it melts easy. I did my best to make my burn ends like the game, but most of it's just kind of improvised swiggle marks. Once I burn all the panels, I contact cement the back of them and then contact cement the base of my box and lay them into place. Lightly position one end, get it where you want it, and then lay the rest down flat and smack that baby into place. The recess took the most amount of time to do for this entire project. Make sure to wear a respirator and work in a well ventilated area while you use a wood burner because the fumes are not good to breathe in. To add my wood grain on the trim work, I just put a stone bit in my Dremel and free-handed the whole box. I even did the bottom of the box for fun, I guess. I used the corner of the bit to carve in the lines. This will make it easier for me on my paint job later. The little square details are made out of some more of that 3mm cheap stuff. I shove a hobby knife into it so that I have something to hold on to and I don't burn my fingers off, and then I just burn a little swirl into the foam. I realize I could use googly eyes for all these rivets, but I don't want my chest to shake like a baby rattle. Cos-Tools has this hole punch with various sizes you can just push through. I also used EVA dowels in the past and just sliced them, but usually I end up with uneven angles on my cuts. This punch makes them nice and even and easy to inject out of the tool because there's a little push button on the top that you just pop them out with. If you follow me on social media, this was the hole punch post that I made the other day. I decided to use actual hinges to save myself a little bit of time. These were the closest to the size I needed. I used a cutting wheel on my Dremel outside because it shot out sparks. Cut off a third of it and then fit it onto the framework on the back. I thought since the What the foam was so dense, it could probably hold a screw, which it seems like it's holding just fine. I screwed in 5 hinges, one on each of the framework pieces on the back. The handles are just made out of some fencing wire and foam dowels. The width of my chest should have been a few inches wider because the sides should have had 4 recesses. You may have noticed on my model in Sketchfab that it was smaller, so that was my beginning reference and my mistake. I should have gone in game. I compromised and made my handles purely decorative, gluing them onto the recess panel instead of onto the wood frame. Sometimes when you mess up, you just kind of have to roll with it instead of starting over from scratch because really it's not that big of a thing. I think it looks decent as is. Now 47 coats of Plasti Dip. Just kidding, only 2. Video's getting kind of long and I was seeing if you were still paying attention. I didn't record a lot of the painting process for some reason. I was literally just dry brushing on PlatFX paint for a few hours with a cheap chip brush. I started with the darkest colors and then worked my way up through the lighter shades. Same with the metal parts on the inside, not much to it.
And we are finished. Here is the end result. I don't know how big of a scale you would say this is, half scale or a third or a fourth of a scale. I don't know. It's not obviously the size it is in game because it basically comes up to the character's waist or so. But it's definitely a smaller scale. I think it looks pretty good. I got a couple of things just off a little bit. This should have been a little bit wider. I needed to make 3 sections of these inlays and I was only able to make 2. So definitely if you're going to build this, you can widen it out just a little bit, change the overall size of the circle at the top and make that adjustment relatively simple. But everything else I think I got relatively close. Even the amount of rivets that are on the box itself, and as close as I could get to the details without like trying to look at pixels to make out what a line on those pixels is. So it's as good as I can get it. It's close enough to recognize what it is, but overall I think it turned out pretty awesome. Thanks again to Cos-Tools for sponsoring this video. Yes, and you can search on my Amazon affiliates page if you want to buy some of their tools through my link and help me out at the same time. It's made by Logan Graphics Tools, but the line is called Cos-Tools. They work really awesome. Yeah, maybe you will try and make one of these chests yourselves and impress your friends with your ability to take something from Skyrim, pluck it into the real world, and shrink it down to a size that you can store some stuff in. Maybe some craft supplies. Or some pirate gold. Or weapons that are small enough. Maybe you'll get some. Yay! And inevitably, they're going to ask you, how'd you make that? You can give them one of these. Tell them, much props. I was thinking maybe I could store my camera in here. I think that'd be a good idea. These hinges work really well.